Le Feminisme proper was born in the revolutionary France of the late 18th century, the political force first, the term around half a century later. In 1791, Olympie de Gouges published the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and the Female Citizen in response to the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen. By publishing this document, de Gouges hoped to expose the limitations of the French Revolution in the recognition of women's rights and to initiate changes in the Declaration of the Rights of Man to include sex equality. De Gouges opened her declaration with the quote, "Man, are you capable of being fair? A woman is asking. At least you will allow her that right. Tell me, what gave you the sovereign right to oppress my sex?" Close quote. In the preamble, de Gouges mirrors the Declaration of the Rights of Man, explaining that women, just as men, are guaranteed natural, inalienable, sacred rights, and that political institutions are instituted with the purpose of protecting these natural rights. She closes the preamble by declaring that the sex that is superior in beauty as it is in courage during the pains of childbirth recognizes and declares in the presence and under the auspices of the Supreme Being the following rights of woman and the female citizen. Close quote. She was one of a small number of women beheaded for treason during the Revolution. Charles Fourier is credited with having originated the word Le Feminisme in 1837. Founder of utopian socialism and a slightly later French supporter of women's rights, he believed that all jobs should be open on the basis of skill and aptitude rather than sex segregated, and that traditional marriage could potentially hurt women's rights as human beings. He himself never married. Fourier is believed to have influenced Karl Marx, who argued as early as 1844 in his economic and philosophical manuscripts that women's position in society could be used as a measure of the development of society as a whole. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Friedrich Engels celebrated the dissolution of the bourgeois family with an erosion of the status of the father already taking effect as women entered the workforce. This, they believed, would lead to a higher form of the family in which women would be the true equals of men. Several years ago at a Philia debate, I heard Sheila Rowbotham explain that nobody could understand feminism without reading this book. International Women's Day itself has Bolshevik roots. Clara, the grandmother of German communism Zetkin, and Rosa Luxemburg at the Socialist Internationale in 1910 advocated for a Women's Day, but the date was not set in stone till 1921, when the USSR officially adopted March the 8th, selected to commemorate a specific date that had led to the Russian Revolution, specifically a 1917 workers' strike at a weapons factory in Petrograd. The women workers' strike that modern feminists claim was the inspiration for International Women's Day did not start until March the 9th. Moving to the United States, in the pioneering Declaration of Sentiments from Seneca Falls in 1848, generally taken as the seminal text of the first wave of feminism, though I would argue it's actually the second after de Gouges' declaration, the claim was made that the history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward woman, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. Close quote. This is just not justified by the history of men risking their lives both in work and war to provide for and protect women, their families and their homes. Granted, the text highlights a series of injustices that women were subject to. However, such a claim remains myopic and misleading. Under coverture legislation, for example, while husbands did become the legal owner of all family assets, in reality this came with responsibilities, and wives were not left entirely devoid of rights. Their rights were simply different. husbands could be criminalised for failure to keep their families as well as he could reasonably be expected. Wives' permission was required to sell any houses owned by the family, and actually, if a member of a man's household ran up debts, he was legally responsible for their repayment. Yes, women deserved to be granted various rights, but so did men who did not deserve the derision they received from first-wave feminists, including Christabel Pankhurst, who notably explained in her 1913 book The Great Scourge that men were little more than carriers of venereal disease. Furthermore, in his 1913 volume The Fraud of Feminism, Ernest Belfort Bax identified two distinct sides to feminism: an articulate political and economic side embracing demands for so-called rights, legitimately, and a sentimental side which insists on an accentuation of privileges and immunities. There is no mention in the Declaration of Sentiments or any first-wave texts of the privileges and immunities enjoyed by women, nor any injustices faced by men. The women's suffrage movement in the US was also tainted by racism. Although an African-American abolitionist, Frederick Douglass, did take to the stage at Seneca Falls, no African-American women are believed to have been present. Furthermore, feminist heroines like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who organised the meeting at Seneca Falls and was a co-author of the Declaration, embraced her racism explicitly, characterising black men as inherently inclined towards rape throughout her career. She also argued vehemently against the 15th Amendment that would extend the vote to African American men, claiming that it would degrade women to follow black men into the franchise. The Women's Social and Political Union, or suffragettes, in the UK were not afflicted by racism. They actually took pride in the strength of support for women's suffrage throughout the British Empire. The night before the coronation of George V in 1917, a demonstration was held to demand the right for women to vote, which featured an empire pageant with representatives from India, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa and the West Indies, and Indian Princess Sophia Duleep Singh was a major donor. They were not, however, devoid of bigotry, and I don't just mean towards men. British suffragettes held a special contempt for the working classes. Not only did they fail to rally behind the truly progressive call for universal suffrage, preferring to campaign for women to be able to vote on the same terms as men, i.e. with property qualifications, but they embarked on a campaign of terrorism that may have hurt some middle and upper class opponents or insufficiently active supporters financially, but would put working class lives in both direct and indirect danger. They smashed shop windows and burned or bombed 17 industrial premises, including a lino factory, a laundry, wood yards and freight yards. They also targeted the cafe at Kew Gardens with an arson attack, destroying a business that was owned and staffed by women and destroying their livelihoods in a pre-welfare state society. When the proprietor went to the WSPU to complain, she was told that she was taking too personal a view on the matter and that the staff would no doubt be glad that they had lent support to the women's cause. 96 homes were targeted. One was that of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Lloyd George, which was empty under renovation. The bomb exploded just before his builders were due to start work, so narrowly avoided injuring them. It did, however, destroy tools which were provided by the men themselves, who may well have ended up on the streets or in the workhouse as a result of their loss. Other houses, though the suffragettes insisted that they only targeted them when empty, actually contained staff who were put at risk. Sulfuric acid and phosphorus in letter bombs caused a number of postmen to suffer severe lung damage and or burns. A bomb planted outside the Bank of England would, if it had not been defused by a policeman, have gone off in a busy commercial area mid-afternoon. A bomb at Lime Street Station, Liverpool, was packed with nuts and bolts to maximise harm. A bomb containing 24 cartridges of gunpowder was placed in the toilets of a theatre to go off during the interval of a matinee performance. The congregation at St. John's Smith Square had to put out a bomb containing 5.5 pounds of gunpowder. Another bomb was chucked into a full territorial army barracks. The jockey whose horse ran over Emily Davison at Epsom in 1913, Herbert Jones, suffered flashbacks to the event throughout his life until he committed suicide in 1951. The idea of these women as noble heroines is an outrage to any right-thinking person, and the idea that their terrorism led to the extension of the vote is implausible. They dropped their suffrage campaign entirely with the onset of World War I and a £20,000 grant from the government, and embarked upon their white feather campaign, for which they have further blood on their hands. Universal suffrage was won by quietly committed lobbying from the suffragist movement, and the sacrifice of so many working-class men during the war.